This video is sponsored by PLAUD. Bulgaria once again is going to the polls this Sunday this week, and there's already talk of a potential Orbán 2.0. That really does feel like a bit of a bad case of political déjà vu, right after Viktor Orbán's party was finally ousted in Hungary just last week. And the man in the spotlight is Rumen Radev. He's an ex-Air Force commander and until very recently the president of Bulgaria. He actually resigned his presidency early just to campaign in these elections. And he's created a brand new anti-corruption movement called Progressive Bulgaria. And the mystery factor around the party is really working. Depending on who you ask, they are either center or center-left, and no one truly knows what they stand for. But they're absolutely dominating the polls, sitting comfortably in first place at around 30%. Now, Bulgarian politics has been, well, to put it friendly, a bit of a mess. Because since 2017, not even 10 years ago, there have been a staggering 9 elections. And that is because the parties simply do not get on. At all. They either can't form a government or they build short-term unstable coalitions that fall apart within months. There are constant red lines and a deep-seated mistrust. And as one of our Bulgarian contacts put it, to be fair, I don't trust any of them either. Which really does sum up the situation in Bulgaria. But to really understand why Radev is surging, we have to look at who he's up against and why the other parties in Bulgaria are so unpopular at the moment. But before we look into that, a quick word from today's sponsor. To make a video like this, I usually have multiple calls, background chats, and pages of research and notes. Because when you're covering EU trade policy or geopolitics, missing one nuance can distort the entire explanation. And it often takes me hours rewatching recordings or digging through notes to double check one small detail. And that's why I really like PLAUD. It records conversations, turns them into clean transcripts with speaker labels, so I know who said what, and then organizes everything into summaries and action points. On my computer, it even reminds me to start recording when a meeting begins. One click and it's done. You might ask, why not just use a phone? For me, PLAUD works differently. It's a dedicated device that records 20 to 30 hours straight with built-in noise reduction, and it doesn't get interrupted by calls or notifications. But what really makes the difference is what happens after. With Ask PLAUD, I can simply ask, what were the key arguments from my discussion on the EU-India trade deal last week? And it finds the exact part in seconds. It also has analysis tools that help pick up on power dynamics and what people actually want. And at that point, it's basically an awesome recall assistant that saves hours of work. PLAUD also meets high international data protection standards, and I can use it professionally with confidence. So, whether you're a journalist, researcher, analyst, or anyone working with complex information, this isn't just about recording. It's about thinking more clearly. You can try PLAUD with 3 months of Pro for free using my link below. If one missed detail costs time, accuracy, or credibility, this is genuinely worth looking at. And now, back to the video. So who is Radev up against, and why are they so unpopular? Their most recent government was a shaky alliance of 3 main players. First, there's GERB and their smaller partner, SDS. GERB is your classic center-right pro-European party. They're led by Boyko Borisov, a guy who started out as this charismatic corruption fighter. But these days, his name is constantly popping up in scandals, mostly involving money laundering. Borisov is the kind of politician who wants to be everyone's best friend, because he's constantly bragging about his special connections with world leaders from Merkel and Friedrich Merz to Erdogan, Trump, and Orbán, all in the same breath. Second, there's the ITN. They're a right-wing populist party founded by Slavi Trifonov, a famous TV personality and ethno-rock singer. They're part of the ECR group in the European Parliament and lean into soft Euroscepticism, focusing on traditional family values and anti-establishment reforms. Third, there's the BSP United Left. This is a coalition built around the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is actually the successor of the old Communist Party. They're a real mix of ideologies, ranging from center-left social democracy to left-wing populism. And then there's the wild cards, DPS. These guys provided the crucial support for the shaky three-party coalition we mentioned earlier. Historically, they've represented the Turkish minority, along with the Roma and Pomak communities. These days, they're led by the infamous Delan Pevski, an oligarch who's actually been sanctioned by the US for corruption. On the EU level, their stance is, well, let's call it blurry. They were recently booted from the Liberal Renew group and have pivoted towards a more catch-all conservative vibe. I think you can really see why this government was built on a shaky ground. You had parties that fundamentally don't like each other trying to run a country. And in November last year, it all went terribly wrong. The breaking point was a new budget that was an absolute disaster. It proposed tax increases for regular people, but offered almost no real investment into the country. Instead, most of that money was planned for salary hikes for government administrators and security services. And to be honest, that is kind of crazy, considering Bulgaria's police force is already one of the most well-funded in Europe. Combine that with a massive wave of perceived corruption, and the streets in Bulgaria exploded. What followed was a massive anti-government wave dubbed the Z protests. While people of all ages took part, around 250,000 people across Bulgaria and the diaspora, it was the Generation Z energy that really defined it. The protests were organized by the main opposition and the other heavyweights in Bulgarian politics, PPDB. This is an alliance of two different parties that teamed up to take on the old guard. First, you have PP. They're centrists in the Renew group, very progressive and famously founded by Harvard graduates who returned to Bulgaria to literally clean up the system. Then you have DB, Democratic Bulgaria. They sit on the center-right with the EPP and are definitely the more conservative half of the two. But this alliance is united by one massive goal, fighting corruption. And during the protests, they were the ones on the front lines, positioning themselves as the clean alternative to the ruling government. Other opposition parties also joined in, like the ultra-nationalist Revival Party, who were also busy protesting against Bulgaria finally joining the euro, along with smaller groups like right-wing Mech and far-right Velichie. And this brings us back to Rumen Radev. At the time of the protests, he was president of Bulgaria, a role that is largely ceremonial. But he really used this platform, plus his enormous personal popularity, to support the protest movement. And this ultimately set the stage for his resignation in January, when he created his new party, Progressive Bulgaria. And right now, he's leading the polls at over 30%, which means he's the most likely candidate for prime minister. But his progressive label is raising quite a few eyebrows. Opponents have dubbed him the Bulgarian Orbán. And when you look at his 4 unshores regarding Radev, you can see why. First, unsure about the EU. Radev says he supports membership, but he's a vocal critic of liberal ideology. He seems to be a strong advocate for a more independent foreign policy that complies with Bulgarian national interests. Second, unsure about Ukraine. Radev has been openly critical of military aid to Kiev. He favors dialogue over defense, and while in 2022 he blamed Russia for the war, he now refuses to say that very openly, probably because he may lose voters. Third, unsure about Russia. This is really the big one. Back in 2016, a former Russian intelligence chief reportedly approved of his candidacy. Radev famously said Crimea is Russian at the moment, and he recently called a Ukrainian victory impossible. And fourth, unsure about corruption. He campaigns on fighting the oligarchy, yet in his own very inner circle, he has been touched by scandals during his time as the de facto leader of the country's various caretaker governments. So, is he really Orbán 2.0? It's a bit of a strong statement, and it's too early to tell, because a lot will depend on who he ends up governing with. Because Bulgaria, coalition partners often shape the direction of the country just as much as the prime minister himself. Looking at the polls, the political field is narrowing. Because of Bulgaria's 4% electoral threshold, we may see only 5 parties enter parliament, making quite a few different coalitions possible. But things became so much more complicated yesterday, because President Rumen Radev signaled that progressive Bulgaria does not want to rely on traditional coalition building. He ruled out cooperation with Borisov's GERB, the PPDB alliance, and the DPS. Instead, he says the goal is a full majority. And that dramatically narrows the options and leaves Bulgaria with 5 realistic scenarios. First, progressive Bulgaria wins an absolute majority, the simplest outcome, but based on the current polling, far, far from guaranteed. Second, if no majority is reached, progressive Bulgaria could cooperate with the Nationalist Revival Party. This has not been explicitly ruled out, but it would be very controversial, especially given Revival's skeptical stance towards the EU. Third, the remaining parties could attempt a broad anti-PB coalition, bringing together GERB, PPDB, DPS, and possibly BSP. On paper, this could produce a pro-European majority, but in practice, these parties deeply distrust each other, which would likely mean more instability. Fourth, Radev could break his word and end up working with a PPDB alliance, arguably the most pro-European option, but also very unlikely. And finally, Bulgaria could once again fail to form a government, leading to yet another election, something that has become so routine in the recent years. We will know more on Sunday, and we do have a live stream planned to go over the results with our Bulgarian experts, where we will assess all of the possibilities. But for now, it really does remain a bit of a mystery. This is what I think though. Bulgarian politics is really just a bit of a mess, and if Radev doesn't win an outright majority, I think we might face another election. My preferred option is obviously option 4, a more pro-European coalition. And of course, I'm very against option 2, the most anti-EU coalition imaginable. That could really point towards more of an Orbán 2 situation. Option 1 is also a bit of a wild card, as it's really hard to tell what kind of leader Radev will actually be. If there are Bulgarians in the chat though, please do let us know what your preference is and why. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to support us further, sign up to Patreon. And of course, thank you to all of our presidents. See you in the next video.